Hello everybody, my name is Alex Acks, though I also do writing under the name Alex Wells, but today I'm definitely Alex Acks, and I'm gonna read you a little selection from my super awesome steampunk book, Murder on the Titania and Other Steam-Powered Adventures, available from Queen of Swords Press, and you should totally buy it because it's a lot of fun, and there's bisexual Latina pirates, airship pirates. Well, rail pirates, really. So today I'm just going to read you a little bit from one of my favorite stories in this book, because it's a collection of novellas, which is The Curious Case of Miss Clementine Nimowitz and Her Exceedingly Tiny Dog. So we shall begin. It was a perfectly ordinary parlor, nicely decorated, pale lace doilies sitting atop furniture done in heavy brown and gold brocade. The general color scheme was maroon and brown, with enough pink and yellow accents to keep it all from seeming too heavy or dark. While many such parlors were given to clutter as the wealthy owners attempted to display both their taste and overflow of cash with countless bits of frilly golden bric-a-brac, this one was neat and carefully tended, enough empty space around objects to draw the eye and invite inspection without being overwhelming. It was austere and quietly dignified. The careful effect of the decorating was, quite unfortunately, spoiled by the body majestically putrefying in the center of the rich carpet, a petite pistol with a mother-of-pearl grip still sitting in its lax hand. Even more disturbing to the serenity of the parlor was the shockingly tiny dog that stood next to the body. The white... One page at a time, self. The white fur of its muzzle rusty with old blood. The little animal growled in what was presumably a threatening manner, though it sounded more like a tea kettle burbling than anything else. "You didn't expect this, did you, Captain?" asked Merriweather Octavian Sims, known by preference as simply Sims to friend and foe alike. He did his best to take only shallow breaths, one hand meditatively smoothing down his generous ginger mutton chops. "There were many possibilities I considered for this particular break-in," Captain Marta Ramos replied in a thoughtful drawl. As they were in the city, she dressed as a common workman, dark, sober clothes with her masses of curly brown hair hidden under an utterly disreputable hat. Her normal, far more flamboyant, and classically piratical scarlet frock coat tended to draw too much attention from the Grand Duchy of Denver's police and security forces. I am utterly unashamed to admit that this was not one of them. Sims cleared his throat. Did the dog... Yes, so it would seem. I suppose we can't blame the little fellow if it's been days and no one to feed him, can we? Well, yes, I concur. I would have thought that if the old girl were planning to off herself, she might have sent her dog out for a walk. Well, it could have been worse. If she hadn't been kind enough to shoot herself in the head, they'd have been confronting a much different scene with a much different source of the growling. The tiny dog would have been eaten rather than the eater after infection had seen to the resurrection of its mistress, mindless and ravenous. Ugh, what a thought that was. Sims sometimes wished his imagination wasn't so finely tuned. Captain Ramos rasped at her chin with fingers covered in rough leather. Well, might as well carry on. We needn't even be quiet now. She gave the dog a long, assessing look, as if gauging just how much damage its small teeth, driven by an obviously outsized ego, would be able to cause. Then she gave Sims a long, equally assessing look. A faint shrug of one shoulder, and she dug around in her pockets to disgorge a twist of string, a bird's nest of a fake beard, and then a packet of jerky wrapped in newspaper. The burbling growl abruptly stopped, the tiny plumed tail beginning to wag with canine hope. Captain Ramos snorted, untying the twine that held the packet closed. Mercenary little thing, isn't he? From what I've seen, most of them are, Sims observed mournfully, and indeed the little animal fell eagerly on the leathery straps of venison the captain tossed onto the carpet nearby, completely forgetting their presence in the bliss of chewing. All right. Captain Ramos nodded, folded the half-full packet neatly, and tucked it back into her pocket. I'll unlock the wall safe. See to the unfortunate Miss Nimowitz, Sims. There's a good chap. He eyed the body doubtfully. Are you certain that's who it is? Clementine Nimowitz was a somewhat eccentric but still highly respected lady of great society, the owner of the well-appointed townhouse and the intended victim of their robbery. Sims knew that much, or perhaps had been would be a more accurate way to consider all of those qualities. She doesn't have much of a face left, he grimaced, or much of a throat. I almost hope she isn't. My life would be so much more interesting then. I vote for boring if it's all the same to you. Sims sighed. Somehow, the moment the dank and earthy scent of decay had hit his nose, he'd known he'd end up dealing with the body. Unfortunately, as he lacked the captain's skill with safes, he could hardly argue that they should trade jobs. He looked down sadly at his gloves. I only just got these. You can have a pair of Miss Nimowitz's to replace them, Captain Ramos suggested in an overly sweet tone before heading to the safe. Sims scowled at her, which was no doubt precisely what she wanted, and moved toward the remains. While the unfortunate Miss Clementine Nimowitz might have been a grand lady of impeccable taste in life, death had done her no favors. In the darker, more proletarian depths of Sims's heart, he found that obliquely comforting. Her dress, heavy blue silk with cream lace, was curiously undisturbed by blood but for the areas, neck, face, forearms, and calves, that the dog had felt free to nibble. Sims cautiously moved his hands over the fabric, trying to breathe shallowly through his mouth. A crackle caught his attention at her breast. He dug for it gingerly, face turned away, and came out with a sheaf of messily folded papers, one corner stiff and gluey with a stray red rivulet. Something tugged at his trouser leg. He glanced down to see the tiny dog. At his attention, it tugged again, tail wagging. Captain? Toss the jerky over here, if you please. He caught the packet, tucked the papers under his arm so he could open it, and pulled out a few more bits of dried meat. The dog gleefully snatched up the venison, which had the side benefit of forcing it to release his trouser cuff. It was probably a good sign it preferred that to a fresh round of human flesh. The unpleasant task of rifling a corpse's pockets was thankfully abbreviated by the fact that Miss Nimowitz, as a refined, nearly cloistered lady, didn't have any. Sims took from her a bracelet, black with dried blood, a cloisonne pin, and a set of earrings. Feeling strangely guilty, he picked a series of gold hairpins from her blood-stiffened coif, finishing the destruction that the bullet and dog had begun. He nearly discarded her fan, but the ribs and guard sticks seemed to be made of delicately carved ivory, even if the cloth sail was ruined. He retreated from the dizzying stink of the corpse and laid out the few items on a nearby table, next to a small china tea set. At first he thought the teapot, single cup, and tray upon which they sat were a display piece, but when he tapped the side of the pot, it proved to not be empty. Sims peered under the lid to find the pot half full of brown liquid. Guess she had a cuppa before shooting herself. Civilized, I suppose. Bemused, he turned his attention to the papers he'd retrieved. Captain? He asked after a moment. I seem to have found Miss Nimowitz's, last will and testament. Shall I put it back? Curious, Sims, since I seem to have found that too. He eyed the document with a new sort of dubiousness. Right. Let me have a look. Captain Ramos walked over and tossed him an empty jewelry box lined with black velvet. See if the spaces in this match the jewelry you removed from her. The box is for the most expensive pieces of her collection, so I can only hope she was wearing those pieces at the time of her death, going out in style and all that. Sims handed over the stained sheaf of papers and then cracked open the box. The earrings did indeed fit perfectly, as did the bracelet, but the box still had more space, another neat slot. The pin definitely wasn't part of the set. Should there be a necklace? Wasn't there one on her? Captain Ramos glanced up from the papers in her hands. Not that I saw, but... Sims grimaced. I'll have another look. Wincing all the while, despite the fact that the lady was long beyond all pain or caring, he drew out his pocket knife and began to poke around the blackened mess that marked what was left of her neck. Sims, the will you found on Miss Nimowitz is 2.5 weeks old, which puts it as relatively new at the time of her departure from the mortal coil. There was a pause, the sound of paper shuffling. They're nearly identical, but for the fact that Miss Nimowitz is now legally leaving the bulk of her estate to a fellow by the name of Mr. Morris Emmett Nimowitz, rather than another crackle of paper. Delia, of the same last name. All the digging had unearthed nothing. Not really our problem, is it? Oh, he didn't like the sound of her tone at all. Well, not our problem, yes, but concern... No, he said firmly. Not our concern either. Unless we're named in the bloody will, and you'd already said we're not, which I'm actually quite glad of since I don't think I want to live in a world where suicidal elderly ladies are gifted with precognition, then the disposition of her estate isn't our concern at all, except for the more portable bits. Frustrated, he prodded the corpse's head aside and spotted a delicate metallic glitter amidst a sea of not quite dry enough blood. It could be interesting, Sims. The affairs of the rich are ghastly and boring to anyone but themselves, he said stiffly as he bent to pry the bit of metal from the carpet. Your delight in boredom is something I will never understand, Sims. And, Captain, is this... He interrupted the all-too-familiar speech by straightening the metal bit in his fingers. She leaned forward and eyed it. The clasp of a necklace? Yeah. Broken off then, Sims frowned. But how? Oh. As one, they turned to look at the tiny dog and its bloody muzzle, which had no doubt all too recently been in the vicinity of Miss Clementine Nimowitz's neck. "Oh," Sims finished in a faint tone. The dog, canine instincts addressing what to do precisely in this situation, wagged its tail and lifted one little paw adorably, asking for a shake. So that's the first section of the story. If you want to find out what happens to the tiny dog, who I will let you know is named Chippy, then you're just going to have to buy the book and read it. And if you go to my blog, there's a little side story about Chippy that I published recently called Sniff Sniff Adventure. So that is at katsudan.net. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Hi everyone, this is Alex Acks sporting a wonderful quarantine haircut. I'm the author of such fine steampunk tales as Murder on the Titania and Other Steam-Powered Adventures, and the new Wireless and More Steam-Powered Adventures. So I'm gonna read like a little bit for you from Wireless and More Steam-Powered Adventures, and this is gonna be a section from the start of the novella Do Shut Up, Mr. Sims. It was a beautiful day at the abandoned silver mine, affectionately known to its occupants as the Devil's Roost. The sun shone down from a nearly cloudless blue sky. A panorama of forest and fields spread out below, with the city that acted as the heart of the Grand Duchy of Denver occupying an evil yellow haze in the distance. Birds sang. A hawk circled lazily as if drawing a target around the sun. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the aspen trees and the needles from the stately pines, occasionally sending a bit of foliage to land on the electrified perimeter fence with a loud crackle. Just beyond the fence, a few deer grazed idly. Meriwether Octavian Sims, known by his preference to everyone he'd ever met simply as Mr. Sims, or Sims, if they were feeling a bit froggy, didn't trust any of the wholesome natural goodness one bit. He held a mismatched cup and saucer, blue and white Changhua china, and a lumpy green, "Oh look, Daddy, I made you a present, isn't it lovely?" respectively. Sorry, that was a bird hitting my door. Nobody appreciates art these days. And sipped his tea with the air of a man who knew that the other shoe was about to drop any second now, and if he was truly lucky, it would land square on his head and kill him before he had a chance to suffer. He was never, ever that lucky. Which was probably for the best, because in his more honest moments of introspection, which he perforce tried to keep few and far between, he had to admit that he actually liked a little bit of adventure. He would likely go just as mad as his best friend and partner in crime if forced into a life of boredom, though very likely in a much more quiet and unimpressive way. Sims was the right-hand man of Captain Marta Ramos, infamous rail and air pirate, scourge of the Grand Duchies, and general smug pain in the arse. How he had attained that position was a mystery still, even to him, and something he really only bothered to wonder about at times when angry people he did not know were attempting to insert knives, bullets, or cannonballs into his more delicate anatomy. These were the sorts of things that happened far too often to a person caught in Captain Ramos's orbit. That Captain Ramos was not currently in residence at the Roost didn't change the fact that Sims could all but feel an invisible noose tightening about his right ankle. No one had tried to kill him for months. The half-hearted efforts of the Grand Duke's security forces hardly counted. They couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, let alone a large man sprinting away in sheer terror. He was due. Sims took another sip of his tea and tugged a scrap of paper from the pocket of his buckskin jacket. The paper was only slightly stained as of yet, and covered with Captain Ramos's almost unreadable slapdash handwriting. Before her departure on her adventure up into the Dead Plains, Sims was simultaneously relieved she hadn't asked him along on that nonsense, and terribly hurt that she hadn't decided she needed him. Was a list of things she expected him to accomplish while she was gone. Mostly things, he noted, that were really supposed to be her responsibility, and she had slagged off as too boring, such as testing the entire crew to make certain they were all still reasonably accurate with their machetes. Fine. He didn't mind being boring old Sims, the giant redhead with the mutton chops. Don't mind him, he's really a kitten underneath it all. He didn't mind, truly. Only he did. Very much. All of the items on the list were crossed off, but for the last three, two of which required a foray down into the city. Check if Count Blatherthwaite, Sims muttered to himself, has moved his safe yet, and weekly Dropbox round. Neither were terribly exciting tasks, which explained why he hadn't gotten up the motivation to take the little rail car down to the mountains and wander around pretending to be a civilized member of society. And then, of course, the last item was there only to annoy him, he was certain. Don't do anything silly. The very idea. Sims didn't do silly things, ever. The whole point of his existence, it often felt like, was to stand by in horrified fascination as Captain Ramos did every silly thing her more cracked mental faculties could invent, as if natural law demanded the presence of a witness at all times. He stuffed the list back in his pocket and took another sip of his tea. Behind him, the metal door that covered the defunct mine shaft opened with a clunk, though any proclivity toward metallic squilling had been removed by the liberal use of oil. Footsteps crunched in the gravel behind him, rapid and purposeful. "Mr. Sims!" Sims recognized the light, melodious tones of Amelia Cavendish. She'd been well on her way to becoming a professional opera singer before she dropped in on the crew during a raid and declared her intention to join, while still wearing a full costume ball gown. He'd never asked why. It wasn't really any of his business. Far more importantly, Amelia wasn't even supposed to be here. That morning, she had departed for town, wearing a red jacket and a jaunty pair of striped trousers guaranteed to scandalize anyone who realized she was female. In her wake had been Gregory Kinzer with his thoroughly disreputable bowler pulled low over his eyes, and Lucius Lambert, the nattiest of the bunch in a tweed three-piece suit, a little four-leaf clover pin on his lapel throwing off sparks of morning light. Yet here Amelia was, returned far too early and with a tone of breathless urgency in her voice. Sims sighed and set his teacup back down. "Hello, other shoe," he muttered. So, if that sounds interesting and fun, the rest of it can be found in this book along with 2 more stories. I hope you enjoy.